As I was telling Joy, the areas of infestation on your property are largely centered around imbalance of moisture, or patterns that typically are associated with imbalance of moisture. As you see, this head is really indicative of the problem you have on the property, where it appears to be shooting an even fan over this radius, but the areas right under here are largely untouched. And so those are the areas that kind of throughout your property are the areas that are most affected. If you go around here, you see the same thing right there. And it's best if you really actually run your irrigation, look at it yourself, and put your hand in those infested areas as it's running, and you'll see that it has very little of the water landing area there. It tends to be landing in these more healthy areas, which is typically why they're more healthy. These are called pop-up horizontal sprayers. They're mostly a problem or associated with lawns that tend to have problems, simply because it takes a lot of redundancy in their settings to be able to really make up a even coverage throughout the property. If you want to give yourself the best chance, first of all, for better grass so that you don't have to water it so often, and give yourself more even coverage, it's best to maybe replace these with the kind of heads that you have back in the backyard, which are more projection heads rather than these pop-up sprayers, to be able to give you more of even coverage. This area actually has pretty even coverage, except that area back there. It's very dry, which is why you see the dead grass. It is typical that an area like that would be infested. Yours isn't. But if you see these projection sprayers, these are not all that bad. These are the kind of sprayers that you really want to have throughout your property. But one thing that you'll see is in this area, like in the front, where that thing is set to such a stream that maybe 70% of the water is landing in about 30% of the area. And this area that is infested is the area that's being shot over. Now this guy is getting a little bit of coverage in here, but with the settings that they have, it's kind of like trying to cover a entire surface with a bunch of hula hoops stacked crossways right next to each other. You're getting this stream here missing that infested area. This landing area where they all want to land is mostly healthy. The reason that moisture control tends to be a big part of this is that you want to be able to water your lawn about twice a week. Even coverage is ideal so that you don't have areas that are really, really wet right next to areas that are relatively very dry, because that leads you to areas where you're really having an imbalance in the biology of your soil, and that imbalance is what they feed on. Too wet areas that don't dry out, like this area in there, which is a landing area for your irrigation. It's shaded, it's bedded, it holds water, probably stays wet for 6 months of the year. This area where moles have absolutely no interest in, right there, is an area that barely gets any water, which is why it's dry there, where they have no interest after running irrigation, and wet there. Here's an area that they're infested in. This is more of a travel area where they're coming through here to here, trying to get to this area. There's not a whole lot of feeding that's going on in there, but I trapped that anyway. Back here, it's such a small area, you have pretty redundant coverage so that the moisture is even, so that you don't have much of a problem. This area is entirely overlooked. Nothing hits this, and I suspect that you probably have a head in here that is not functioning and leaving this area dry. This area again has pop-up sprayers. It's a little bit susceptible just because it doesn't have entirely even coverage, but the redundancy of them is good enough that it doesn't really look like there's much risk of a problem in here. But keep in mind, if you're going to be able to mist those areas down so that you're not having such a stream, instead you're having even coverage by misting it down, you're also going to be needing to water far less, maybe once, twice a week. In doing so, you're going to want to rethink entirely the amount of time that you run your irrigation, so you're really going to want to reformulate that whole thing. Again, you have the pop-up sprayers here. in real hot weather, real dry weather, you probably have patches of green and patches of brown through here just because of the uneven coverage. And then in this area you have a drip zone, which is really primed for molds because you have all this dry area, but that drip zone, which is catching all the moisture, which is growing a worm factor. That's the gist of it. Call me or email me if you have any questions on it. There's a tutorial on the website that teaches you how to adjust your irrigation settings to be able to make it more of a mist, which is what we're talking about, and reducing the streaming effect to give you more even coverage. See you, bud.